All right, welcome everyone to Sport Fuels Life podcast. I'm Bill Riddle, your host. Appreciate you being with us once again. Today on the show, we've got Zach Brandon. Zach has been in this mental performance space for a while, and as you probably know, I need as much help mentally as possible, and as a coach and athlete myself, and really excited about this. So Zach, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, no, I'm honored for the invitation, Bill. I'm right there with you. I feel like there are many instances where I will share something, whether it be in a presentation or in a discussion or a one-on-one. And as I'm saying it, I'm thinking to myself, "Oh, this is a good reminder for me. Like this is something that I need to like remind myself of or use." So my experience and mental performance, I've felt that many times where I'm like, "This is really more." To help me than it is probably to help them.
Right. Well, this is part of our series on mental performance, and as we kind of talked a little bit before we got started, the audience and the folks that are kind of listening in range from college athletes, a lot of tennis people, a lot of Olympic sports represented here. But one of the things we have found to be true is it doesn't matter what background you come from, whether it be Olympic sports or team sports, um, whether you're a coach or an athlete, right? We still all kind of have some of the same struggles, right? Um, has your experience been that maybe there's some commonalities here, or give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think very much so. I think at the end of the day, the common thread, kind of irrespective of sport or performance domain, is that we're talking about human beings. And human beings can be complex. Human beings can be complicated, and our brains are oftentimes wired not necessarily to help us thrive, but to try to like make sure that we just simply survive, which from a performance standpoint isn't always the most conducive, isn't always the most helpful to our success. And so I say all that from the standpoint of I do think some of the challenges that you see um, in this space apply across settings. So more often than not, many of the athletes that I've worked with have tried to figure out how do they build and strengthen their confidence to be more robust, to kind of irrespective of circumstances, irrespective of outcomes. How do they become more resilient in the face of different adversity and bounce back to different challenges, obstacles that inevitably are part of the journey in sport. How do you slow the game down? How do you focus on being in the moment and not kind of caught up in the magnitude of the moment and getting overwhelmed and things like that? How do you manage some of that anxiousness, that overthinking? So all of that, like I don't know about others, but again, I find more often than not, those things certainly show up in a lot of conversations, irrespective of the setting. And really, it's again because the common thread is we're talking about human beings in that equation.
Yeah. Well, we kind of jumped right into it, but let's take a quick little back step here. And it's always interesting to me, especially how someone finds their way into becoming a mental performance coach, right? Give us a little bit of your background and kind of tell us how you got from where you were to this space, because it's always so interesting.
Yeah. I think what I appreciate about that is the more people you talk to, as you mentioned, there are, each person has their own unique pathway. I kind of call the profession, much like probably many other professions, a pathless path. In other words, many of us have merged onto this in this same direction and on this kind of same road, but our paths in getting there have all looked a little bit different. For me, sports were always a core part of my identity, a core part of my childhood and some of my fondest memories growing up. So I kind of played I guess the traditional, American three, which being football, basketball, and baseball, and then was fortunate to go play baseball at the next level and attended a small college in Oregon where I did my undergrad and was able to continue my athletic career. So what was great though is A lot of individuals that I know, they get into this space because they feel as though it's the resource or the skill set that they needed in their journey that maybe they didn't have, or maybe it's the area of their game that maybe wasn't quite the strongest. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I was mentally bulletproof by any means or extremely mentally tough. However, I do think the mental side of the game was an area of sport that I appreciated deeply. And I think in hindsight, I had some mentors, some people in my life that very much shaped that. So coaches that I had growing up, my dad while I was growing up, and then as I got into college. So it was always something that I deeply appreciated. And then I took a sports psychology class in the middle of my collegiate career, and I was like, oh, there's this whole profession out there where I can do this on a day-to-day basis, and kind of blend two things that I were important to me, which was sports and helping others. So
Right.
that was kind of the catalyst, I guess, for it, that class and putting it all together. And honestly, ever since then, for the last decade plus, it's been, pouring all my time and energy into that.
It's always really really interesting how people like yourself get into this, and the stories behind it are I find fascinating. Um, Growing up as an athlete, were there some hurdles that you found that were troublesome for you that you were like, okay, well, I didn't know how to handle it now, and now as a performance coach, you can kind of reflect back and go, you know what, I was in that exact same spot, so now I'm in a position where I can help someone who's there as well.
Much like, a lot of my professional experience now is predominantly in the professional sports setting. So last 8 years or so in professional baseball. And it's interesting because I think working with a lot of those veteran players, many of which were able to develop mental skills, tools, and strategies and so forth, kind of just through sheer experience. Some of them, maybe worked with somebody one on one. Some of them may have had formal training in it, but I think a lot of them, just learned it through some trial and error and talking to peers and kind of figuring out on the fly. I shared that because, my first couple years in school, that was kind of where I was at, just trying to figure this out. I felt like I probably was able to learn some things. Like my dad used to always talk about just being composed and being kind of poised, on the field and, having good body language and those types of things. So like I don't think was aware at all of sports psychology, but I
Right.
think many of those lessons and things that he instilled in me are very representative of things that I've now tried to help a lot of athletes with. And then when I did discover mental skills and different tools, I started to use it while I was still in my own athletic journey. And that's one thing that I'm really appreciative of is I was able to have a couple of years in college where I started to work on breathing. I started to work on my self-talk. I started to be more intentional with my routines and, even just teasing out the difference between like a superstition and an actual routine, like something that actually has purpose and meaning instead of something that's like fear driven, which is really what most superstitions are. So, as I learned all of that, I got a couple of years to apply it, and I'm super grateful for that. And so I think that was really useful to me. And then just learning to really, I think, slow things down. And again, I think the breathing in particular was probably the skill set that um, became the most useful for me in my own athletic journey. But yeah, that was there was on the front end of that, there was a lot of trial and error, and then on the back end, it's like anything in our profession where I always say that there's three levels to the mental game. You learn it is level one. Level two is you practice or you train it. And level three is you learn how to take ownership of it and then really refine it to make it something that's yours and unique to you. Um, and so early on, I think where there's often a gap is that level one to level two. People have learned it, they've read about it, they've had somebody come speak to them, they've listened to a podcast. Like there's all these great resources out there, but the application of it is actually where there's a differentiator. And so I was just grateful that I had, a couple of years in college for my own athletic experience to be able to try to like actually practice it and train it.
Yeah, the as you were talking about that, I'm thinking about the resources, and you talk about those, and maybe nowadays, and you can speak to this. Is it easier for athletes and coaches as well because we have all these different podcasts and so many different kind of resources that are out there that and I think back to when I was playing in this was gosh in the in the 1980s and early 90s trying to make my way playing tennis. We just didn't have that. We would have maybe a friend, maybe a coach if they were open to it. But back in the day, it was this was not an area where we would spend a lot of time. It was more about physical, not as much mental. Uh, is it easier now for coaches and athletes because we have these resources, or is it a challenge because there's so many resources?
Um, this is a great question. Really good question. I'm a big proponent that there's a lot of things in life that you have good intentions and there can be unintended consequences. Um, and I share that from the standpoint of, nowadays, like, yeah, we do have a ton of resources. We do have, a lot more access to it than maybe ever before.
Hmm.
But I don't know that we've necessarily seen like a proliferation of more quote unquote like mentally strong athletes or
Hmm.
competitors. Yet again, the it's signs suggest in essence that there's more resources, so we should have more tools, more strategies, and so forth. So it's not quite that easy, and I think there's a few layers as to why. I do think inherently there are certain challenges that are, it is a different landscape that student athletes now are navigating, that they're
Right.
coming up in. It's a different, competitive youth sports, for example, like there's its own fair share of different challenges as well as opportunities that are afforded. Again, and I think that's why I share that of, sometimes you have something that has great intentions and yet it can still bring about unique challenges and so forth. So I think that's one. I think but the other side of it where like there's benefit in kind of the a more traditional approach, which is you didn't have access to it, you kind of had to figure it out on your own, is you really learn how to be your own coach. Like you
Right.
really learn how to be resourceful in your own and pay attention and to talk to people. And I think you just see over the course of time that has shifted in some cases for some. And yeah, so I don't know. I think in many ways the answer might maybe it's a cop out, but I think it's a little bit of both. I think there's benefits to it, and also I think that just because you again going back to that level one versus two, like just because you know it doesn't mean that it shows up for you
Right.
on the court or on the field or wherever your domain is. And so yeah, I think it's a really interesting current landscape that student athletes are having to be drawn in. And I think it's great that you have the tools, but there's also something to be said about how those were traditionally forged in the fire, we'll say, over
Yeah.
time.
Well, it does seem like for many many years, and I could think about this growing up. The mental side of things is we didn't talk about it. We didn't spend time on it. It was all about the physical, being ready to play physically. There was never really any discussion about mental or emotional preparation. But as we know, it comes down to the where the rubber meets the road and those pressure situations. That's where we see athletes and coaches, right? That's where athletes and coaches tend to kind of crack or make those mistakes. And this this area, would you say it's as important, more important than the physical side of things, or are they equal? I mean, if somebody's listening in, going, well, how much time do I spend on my mental side versus my physical side? Is there a balance?
Yeah, I think So yes, everybody loves to use and I've used this before many times, of the idea of like, okay, what percentage of your sport is physical versus mental? And then whatever that equation is, you follow it up with, okay, well, what percentage of the time do you train the mental side? And usually what it indicates or shows is the disproportionate amount of time that we actually spend training and honing the mental side. I think more often than not, you hear many articulate that the mental side is a pretty big piece of the pie, but not a lot of energy and time is being spent developing it. So I do think that's an important piece, but I think it's kind of like, maybe this is skewed by the word, but like when you use the word balance, like it made me think of like work-life balance for a brief moment. And I think where it becomes problematic or a trap for many people is they think that that means balance is 50-50,
Right.
and I don't think balance is 50-50. It's really more about finding the right blend for you. And I think that varies across different sports. So, is the mental side a part of every sport? Absolutely. And do we need to make sure that time and energy is being developed or is being used and spent to develop it? Yes, absolutely. And is it more important? I don't know. I don't know if that's for me to say. And it would be speaking, I think, a little out of turn for different sports. Those that I know in tennis or baseball or golf or those types of sports, you hear a lot how mentally challenging it is. So I think it is an important kind of component. I think the biggest thing for me is I like to ask players, what is it that they like when they're at their best, or what it is it ideally that they want to feel or experience on the court or on the field and how they play? Like use some of the words that would describe it. Like, so I want to play with freedom. I
Hmm.
want to play smooth. I want to play with confidence and so forth. My follow-up is always, how does your current routine prepare you to feel that or prepare you to be that in the moment? So I share that because, for example, what I see a lot of times, and I can't completely speak to tennis. I do have some experience working with tennis players, but um, what I see is like practice, for example. So much of practice is very judgmental of ourselves because we're trying to hone our craft. We're oftentimes spending a lot of time working on our weaknesses. We're dissecting all of our moves and things like that. There's not a lot of freedom in how we prepare and how we train. So my challenge then is like, well, what makes you so confident that when the game starts or when the match starts, you can all of a sudden flip a switch and play with freedom? You need to have a routine that helps start to create that for you, not only with what you do mentally, but also what you do physically, what you do is part of your tactical strategy and preparation and so forth. So that for me is, I don't know what that equation is exactly or percentage across every sport, but I do think there is an important need to ensure that how you are training is representative of the type of version of you that you want to show up once the game starts.
Interesting. You know, as you were talking about that, my mind was going to, when you said free and smooth, my mind was going to the fact that, you come from a baseball playing background and working with major league baseball players. Is there a difference when you start looking at positions? Because I'm always kind of equating back to tennis because that's where I've lived for the last 40 years. Although growing up, back in the old days, we played everything: baseball, football, basketball, the whole thing. But is there a difference when you start looking at maybe a pitcher catcher who, they're touching the ball every single moment, right? They're always kind of like in the moment versus a player who's in the outfield, right? Who every 10 minutes may get a ball, right? Or however so often. Is there a difference in the mentality when you start talking to these athletes by position, or is it just like across the board? Look, doesn't matter how often you're getting the ball or how few times, it's kind of the same concept.
I do think, it's generalizing a bit, but I do think there are certainly differences across different positions. Let's just take that example that you shared. I think you could almost split it. You have a position player that's like out in the field versus a catcher versus a pitcher. Every single one of those requires a great deal of focus for different reasons. Now they're all trying to accomplish, in essence, a similar kind of goal or outcome for the team. However, the process to get there is different for each individual. So what's shared is how do you leverage that time in between pitches? And nowadays, and I don't know, again, I don't know tennis as well, but like in baseball, it's become a really interesting challenge because we have a pitch clock now,
Hmm.
and so it's sped it up. For many, what we used to always say is like, hey, when the game speeds up on you, like step off or call time or like do something to kind of reset in between pitches. You're not afforded that now, or not nearly as much. So I think it becomes really critical now more than ever. How do you start to slow things down before you even get out there? So in baseball, it's like a pitcher, it's like before you leave the dugout in between innings, it's like, hey, have you taken a little bit of time to regulate yourself in a way where you feel more centered, you feel more present, you're more ready to go out and kind of, hopefully pitch freely. I think the other side of it is now is like a catcher, for example, you're not only trying to accomplish your task, but you're trying to be cognizant of what the pitcher's doing. And you, in essence, become a really important figure in helping that individual slow down if needed, by you calling time or doing something, sending some sort of reminder or verbally saying something that, maybe invites them to shift or reset or something like that in the moment. So I think I do think there's some unique differences in terms of focus is like, for example, across the board important. However, how it gets used, how it gets challenged is a little bit different. And then if you're like an outfielder, for example, we talk about boredom can be a big threat to those that are trying to do great things because there's a lot of mundaneness to being great at something. Like you're going to do a lot of repetition. You're
Yeah.
going to do a lot of the same drills, a lot of the same reps, a lot of the same workouts day to day. So it can be very mundane and boring, quote unquote, at times. So it's up to you to make sure that you stay engaged and that you stay focused when you need to, and you learn how to shift your focus accordingly. So I think that applies across the board. But yeah, there are definitely, I think, some unique challenges that each position, in essence, encounters, and I think probably again it applies to across different sports too.
A few years ago, I was recruiting a tennis player for our college team, who also was a baseball player growing up. He played tennis and baseball, and he was a pitcher. And the thing that really kind of drew me into him as an athlete was knowing what it takes to be a pitcher on the mound and have every eye on you all the time. And I find a lot of similarities in pitchers and tennis players because when you're out there to serve, all eyes are on you. You've got to compose yourself and deliver. Have you seen some similarities in sport to sport or athletes that are kind of like that? Where like if I'm looking to kind of uh, you know find ways to be better, I can look at another sport and draw from those things.
One of my favorite things to invite people to do is to draw from other sports.
Right.
It's to, does that mean that it's going to apply 100% transferably? Obviously, no. However, there is so much I think that you can learn and pull from other sports. So I'm trying to think of how exactly I asked this question, but I remember asking a player once, like, if you, in essence, could um, develop the mental attribute or skill of an elite performer in any given context, like what skill or like attribute would you want and what arena would you pull from? So for example, we had individuals that were like, oh, I would want the courage or the fearlessness of like a professional bull rider,
Hmm.
or I would want the ability to like stay focused and free like a big wave surfer, or whatever. And we just kind of were rattling off all
Yeah.
these different kind of arenas and stuff, but it led to some really cool conversations about what is it that these individuals do? And what you find is like a lot of the same skills apply across the board. The
Yeah.
things that they're using, irrespective of setting, are relevant across. This is where and forgive me because I'm gonna slightly butcher this a little bit. You would be able to, hopefully, you'll probably be able to correct this, but there was the great commencement speech by Roger Federer
Yeah.
where he talked about, hey, this over the course of my career, this is the percentage of games that I won, and it's an incredible amount. And yet I only won 54% of the points
Right.
in those. It's like, I mean, and you're talking about the best in the world
Right.
at their given craft. So I think that applies, like that very is relevant to baseball
Yeah.
in terms of, being able to, how do you manage failure? How do you keep things in perspective? How do you adopt, we talk a lot about like recovery speed in essence is like how quickly, not just physically, but mentally can you reset after a mistake, after a tough call, after a missed opportunity? And how do you kind of develop some sort of trigger or cue or utilize your breath or whatever that tool is that kind of help guide your focus back to the moment, to me is really crucial. That the one last thing I would add with it, again, kind of in just going off of that for a moment, this idea of like resetting and refocusing. This will be a little dated, maybe for those listening, especially if they're younger or student athletes. But Miles Davis, the great like jazz musician, has like a really famous quote that it's not the note you play that's the wrong note; it's the note that you play afterwards that makes it right or wrong.
Right.
And I think that's like so relevant in sport, It's like it's really about what you choose to do next. It's not just about what your reaction is, it's about what your response is. And so, anyway, I say all that because whether we're talking about music, whether we're talking about big wave surfing, tennis, etc., like I think there are wonderful lessons that we can all extract from those different spaces. And sometimes being willing to go outside your arena maybe helps you see it with more clarity and more clear like perspective that you can then use. The one last, I guess, quick example that comes to mind is there's like a really famous story about Kobe Bryant and how this epitomizes Kobe Bryant, but he studied like how great white sharks hunt prey
Mm.
and like paid attention to how they used angles to like hunt. And he used that because at the time one of the other top players of that generation was Allen Iverson, and he's like, I needed a new way to be able to guard him more effectively. And so he talked about like finding inspiration from great white sharks. So irrespective of what space you pull from, I think there's a lot of great lessons to be had.
Well, I think that's probably one of the bigger things for those who are like listening, especially maybe some young athletes who are listening into this. It's and I've always subscribed to this that I can learn something from, my sport, right? But I can learn so much more from athletes and coaches across different genres and how they respond to, exactly to your point there of Kobe looking at, how sharks attack and just angles and things like that. I think some of the times we get so focused as a coach or an athlete in your sport that you're really just kind of dialed in there. But the reality is, if you were to just kind of broaden that and start to find ways to draw from these other sports, it's going to really open up the possibilities, resources, your mind a bit as you kind of go forward. Is that one of the things that you try to encourage coaches, athletes, people that are in sporting arenas? Is that one of your kind of tricks? It's like look beyond to what you're just doing.
One of the quotes that I've really come to like is it's hard to read the label from inside the jar.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is like when you're inside the jar, like when you're inside like the pressure cooker of whatever your given domain is, this applies whether you're an athlete or whether you're a coach. Sometimes there's things that are clear to others or clear to those with a different vantage point or perspective that you're missing or that you're neglecting. Like this is what great coaches do all the time for players. Think of how much in your own coaching experience you're helping a player see something that they're struggling to see in themselves, whether it's a blind spot, whether it's a strength, whatever it might be. But like sometimes we need that outside perspective
Hmm.
to see it from a different lens. So I think that's where going outside of your domain can be useful. I think this is also where sometimes, you think about it too, like this is where film helps with players. Like you go back and you watch yourself play, you're going back and you're re-experiencing it, you're reliving it, but you're doing it from a completely different angle. It's generally not a first person point of view,
Yeah.
camera shot that you're getting of your film. So
Right.
you get this third person perspective that's so valuable. So I think sometimes we need other people to help us see those blind spots.
Hmm.
And again, when we're in it, we're so focused on just trying to, be at our best. We're trying to just survive. We're trying to navigate whatever challenges that we're kind of confronting. It can create a lot of lack of clarity for us. And so this is where I think, yeah, going outside of your domain can be one of those ways in which you kind of just see it from a new vantage point, and hopefully then can play a little bit more freely.
Earlier, you had mentioned or said a couple times the word focus, right? And I hear that a lot when you're around a field, an arena, a court. You hear moms and dads and grandparents telling their players to stay focused. You hear young coaches talk about staying focused and or focus on the ball. That's one that always gets me. It's like really, I mean that's kind of like I'm trying, Dad. I'm trying, Coach. Right? I feel like that word focus is a bad word sometimes. Would you agree? And if so, why would it be such a bad word when it really is kind of like the point in which we're trying to be?
Think what you're raising, which is a really important distinction here, is when people the association that we've created with it, that's we have that immediate like reaction. Well, it's like, well, of course, like I know I should focus. Like I know what I like. I know it's because people are telling you the what of focus, but they're not teaching you how.
Right.
And I think that's an important like distinction. So with that, I think sometimes it's helpful to just understand before we teach you how to focus, let's actually just understand what makes it difficult to focus.
Mm.
So, what I mean by that is, we were talking about earlier, like when things are boring, when things are mundane, like this is especially difficult in today's landscape because we have instant access to entertainment all the time. We have instant access to so many different things. We're not, you hear all the stories about like, what you used to do in car rides when like you didn't have, screens and things like that. Like you stared at the raindrops, like,
Yeah.
or whatever. Like, just there like you hear those like fun stories, but like the reality is like we have so many other things now that immediately hook our attention, and can be a distraction for us. So I think that's understanding what gets in the way. That's one example. I think another one is sometimes we don't realize that the language that we're using to describe something can create unnecessary friction or stress for somebody. So for example, it's like, hey, this is a big game. This is a big moment. This is a big match. I would invite whoever likes to use that phrasing to like, instead of using the word big, just switch it out with next. This is not a big game. This is the next game. This doesn't have to be a big match. This is the next match. Doesn't have to be a big point. This is just the next point. So when we do that, we shift the focus away from the magnitude and more directing our focus back to like, okay, well, what is it that I actually need to focus on here that can then help me um, not compound a mistake and so forth. So I think that's um, an important piece in the pie or in the equation. I think the other thing that comes with focus is just the recognition and understanding that our mind time travels. We can go to the future and we can go back to the past, and yet our body is always in the present. Yet we spend a pretty disproportionate amount of time outside the present moment. And this study was done years ago, but there was a Harvard study that found that about half the time, I think it was 48% of the time, our mind is not where our feet are. Um, I'd be willing to bet that it might even be a little bit more now, today, than it was, this was at least over a decade ago
Mm,
when that study came out. And so we spend a lot of time outside the present moment. And this matters when we're talking about, that common mental game phrase of like, hey, can you slow the game down? Well, the game doesn't get fast necessarily physically for us. It gets fast above the shoulders.
yeah.
And when it gets fast for us mentally, it's because our mind is generally anticipating an outcome that hasn't happened yet in the future. And we're getting kind of hijacked by what ifs, or we're getting stuck on something that's already happened and we're having a hard time letting it go. And so I think where focus becomes important is how do we help you shift your focus to where your feet are when you're in a competition?
Mhm.
I say all that because there are moments where, yeah, like your mind should go to the future and like we can visualize, we can game plan, we can prepare for things before they've happened. And that's a great skill, but that's not the skill that you need once the game starts. And once the game starts, you need to be able to play in the moment and play, hey, next point, and then be able to recover when your mind starts to get distracted and stuff. So to me, I think that's probably where that word can be challenging for some, is because they hear it and again, they're just being told what to do, but they're not being taught how to do it.
Right. I was kind of moving towards one of the things that happens a lot in tennis for tennis players. You can miss the ball into the net, or you can miss the ball wide, or you can miss the ball out. And as a coach, I probably remember too many times early on in my career saying, "Hey, just don't miss. Whatever you miss, don't miss in the net." Right, which then takes your mind to, well, there's this net there, and I'm going to miss. And now I can honestly say most of the time I'm talking to our athletes and our players about, look, if you are going to miss, let's just miss it big, so it takes the net completely out of it. Um, and they visualize maybe the back part of the court, things like that. Visualization. How much of that is important to athletes, kind of moving to that next level, and is that an easy thing to do, or is it something that's difficult for athletes to try to wrap their mind around?
This ties back briefly to the focus conversation that we were just having, but I think one added point that ties into this idea of like when you're talking about like visualizing and having like a clear target, one of my favorite quotes to like share with athletes is that the man who aims at nothing hits it with amazing accuracy.
Right.
And so, like, our brain works a lot better when we have a clear target. Without a clear target, you're just inviting a lot of distractions. Your energy is going to get more scattered. And so, you need something clear to like direct your focus towards. Visualization is great because you are, in essence, creating that target in advance before you get out there in the moment.
Yeah.
With that, though, this is what a lot of people don't realize is there is a lot of people don't realize that they do visualization wrong.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is most of the time, when you ask somebody how do they visualize, they picture themselves visualizing success. They picture themselves visualizing, hitting aces every time, striking a guy out. Like they picture all the moments where they're in essence, they feel great, their body's moving the way they want it to, the ball is moving the way that they want it to,
Yeah.
etc. But what research shows is that the most effective forms of visualization not only have you picture and imagine you being successful, they also you also have to leverage seeing yourself respond to the inevitable adversity and challenges that you're also going to confront.
Hmm.
And I think that is oftentimes missed. So I'll give you an example, and this is going to be a baseball example, but we had a player who he was a starting pitcher. First few times, or first time through the lineup, facing 1 through 9 of the opposing team. So basically, for the first 3 innings of the game, he was unbelievable, extremely good, and having a lot of success. Once the lineup came back around and he had to face the leadoff hitter again and all those guys the second time, his numbers like plummeted and he was not the same guy. And so he and I were kind of talking a little bit about his routine. We were talking about what he would do in the bullpen before the game. And he was like, I knew that visualization was important to him, an important part of his process. So I asked him one day what he visualized. And he said, I see myself facing the first two hitters of the game and I strike them out on 6 pitches, like basically the bare minimum. And I was like, okay, like that's fair. Like, and that makes sense. Like, I would say that that's working pretty good for you right now. You know, like you're
Yeah.
in essence, like you're going out there and you're lights out from the get-go. But what he wasn't mentally preparing for was once that first hitter got on base, or he had to face a guy a second time through the order, and maybe he now had to pitch him a little bit differently. He wasn't mentally preparing for those moments. So it's not go out and picture failure. That's not what I'm referencing
Right.
here. But what I am asking for is like picture yourself down in a set, picture yourself after you've had, you know, an unforced error or a forced error, or you make an error or something doesn't go your way. What do you want your body language to be like in that moment? How do you want to redirect your focus in that moment? What are you gonna use? Because again, like nowadays, and again, I can't speak to tennis, but in baseball, like you have less and less time because of a pitch clock. So it becomes, I think, critically important for you to picture yourself in those moments beforehand. And again, I think that's what a lot of people don't realize is research shows that we're actually oftentimes doing visualization. I wouldn't say wrong, but it's incomplete. And really what we also need to make sure that we're tapping into is some of those obstacles and adversity that we all know are inevitably part of competition.
That's man, that's good. I was thinking as you were talking about that about confidence, and you hear people talk about confidence and how do you build confidence if you're not a confident person in general? And I say that because I'm seeing a lot of young athletes kind of come out and they're just kind of like they're just kind of in this like gray area, right? They're not weak, but they're not also not like really strong. You know, when they walk out there, is there a way that you know these tools that you have can help them to develop some confidence that if they're not necessarily one way or the other?
Yeah, so great question. So I think you know, a lot of these skills that we've already described can be useful, right? The self-talk matters, the visualization can help, body language, like those are all kind of traditional mental skills that matter a lot. I think there's two other ways though that I think are critically important here. First and foremost, um, competence builds confidence.
Okay.
So what I mean by that is like the more skilled you are, the more you're going to feel confident, the more you're going to be confident, right? So I think first and foremost, it's you can't shortcut or override just sometimes the lack of skills. You know, there are those individuals that we always say like sometimes there are players out there that they have like delusional self-confidence and it propels them, right? Like we
Yeah.
like there's a time and place where like, hey, like don't let me puncture a hole in that for you. So there is something to be said about that. And at the same time, when you can kind of balance that with skills and like refined techniques and things like that and become well equipped from a physical technical lens, you're going to be more confident in the process. So I think first and foremost it's just understanding that. Now to do that effectively, this is where again, like from a skill, like a physical skill development side of things, creating a practice environment that is more representative of the competition environment really matters immensely, kind of irrespective of sport. Baseball for years, the way in which guys would train, like on the offensive side, was, it was very easy, very like comfortable. It was low stress and it was very repetitive. Now, over time, we've trained it to be with a lot more variability, to be more representative of the game, which is going to have uncertainty. It's going to have more pitch movements. It's going to have faster velocities and things like that. So, if you want to strengthen your skill set, I think first and foremost too, it's like does your practice environment, is it representative of the demands of competition? That's an important audit. But the other thing too, I think something that I'm very bullish on is that confidence is more of a focus issue than it is anything else. And here's what I mean by that. People like to say this player, like they lose their confidence when all of a sudden they start to spiral or they have a couple of bad matches or games in a row. I don't think people lose confidence. I think they just stop focusing on why they should possess it in the first place.
Hmm.
So here's what I mean by that. What happens is we get so fixated on addressing our weaknesses, filling our gaps. We spend a disproportionate amount of time concerned with the distance between where we ultimately want to get to and the type of player we want to become and where we're at today. So we focus obsessively oftentimes over this gap. We forget what we've gained along the way. We forget to pay attention to the progress that we've made.
Right.
We forget to pay attention to the skills that we've developed. We forget to pay attention to, if I were to ask you, what's like, what's something that you've grown and developed in that used to be a challenge for you? Like, we just kind of overlook that because we immediately move the goalpost and we go to the next thing.
Mhm.
And so, where I think it's important for athletes, but also for coaches, is we also have to shine a spotlight on players and their gains and their successes, sometimes even if they're small. Because one of the things that we know from a research standpoint is one of the biggest drivers of human motivation and behavior is the sense that you're making progress.
Right.
And one of the things that we do as human beings is we get really good at not paying attention to our progress. So sometimes, again, we need others around us. So I think that's an important distinction for me is that confidence isn't generally something that you lose. It's just something that you stop focusing on why you should possess it in the first place.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where how you hone your skills and how you pay attention to your own growth and how you give yourself credit for that matters immensely.
Well, okay, so I'm gonna go down a street here with you. Um, and I live on this street, right? Because I coach men and women's college tennis, and um, you talked a little while ago about delusional, right? And I have been of the mindset that most of my guys go out there on the court almost delusional, and I reflect back over myself, like I feel like I can still play against some of these guys, and I'm three times their age. Is that my delusion, right? Versus our women's team, where we're trying to build more confidence, and I feel like that they go out there a bit more quietly confident than the guys do. The guys go out there maybe like overly confident or loudly confident. Am I dreaming this, or do you see this to be something that might be true when you're talking about guys versus girls competing?
Yeah, I think there definitely can be differences for sure. I would say, bear in mind, like a lot of my work has been predominantly with male athletes, so it's been at least 8 years since I've worked in a full-time capacity with women. But I say that from the standpoint of like, I think where my mind goes with it is like, there's a lot of paradoxes in sport, like, so like, for example, you talk to many coaches and they say, do you want players that are self-aware, for
Yep.
example, and good self-evaluators? Most coaches I know raise their hand at that. And at the same time, like we just said, like, hey, like there's something to be said about when you're delusionally self-confident. Those two things like don't match, right? Like, so it's understanding that I think there's like a little bit of like a give and take. And again, I don't know what the right blend is, and maybe that even does vary too across like between men and women or across maybe even different sports and so forth. But like, I think this is where just understanding as a coach how critical it is for you to help individuals see and tap into where they can feel that confidence or where they can be confident. And I think I should have been careful in how I just said that because I'm a big proponent that, one of the problems that sometimes occurs with confidence is we attach it to a feeling.
Hmm.
So if you look up the definition of confidence, there's generally actually two main definitions. The first one is confidence is a feeling of certainty.
Okay.
The second definition is it's an act of trust. Most of the time, we think of confidence, we think of the first definition. It's like, do I feel it or not, right? But what we know is that feelings are very inconsistent.
Yeah.
Like feelings are like the weather. They come and go, and they don't last forever. And that's the beauty of them on both sides. Is it's not going to last forever. Our actions, though, are a lot more controllable, and we can choose to be confident irrespective of how we feel. And that's really what, to me, I try to help a lot of players understand is like I'm not a big fan of like, hey, like they need to be fearless
Right.
because it implies that like you shouldn't feel fear. And then if they feel fear, they think, well, I'm not supposed to feel this, so something's wrong with me, or that I need to fix this, or I'm broken. That's not the case. You can feel fear and still choose to give your best effort. You can feel self-doubt and still choose to trust your preparation. That's a choice that you can make, and it's going to be determined by your actions. So for me, I just find it ironic that in most sports, your success is going to be a product of your consistency. And we put a lot of stock in confidence, which is very inconsistent.
Hmm.
Like there's a lot of irony, I think, in that. And so for me, I'm not here to paint confidence as a bad thing. It's more so just can you also understand that it doesn't have to be just driven by whether or not you feel it and you can still feel it and choose to take, you know, um, still choose to trust yourself, still choose to give your best effort, still choose to play with freedom. And that's again going to be more a product in your actions along the way.
Well, Zach. I mean, look, this has been a lot of great information. I've been making a bunch of notes, but before I let you get away, I want to talk about this because to me, it kind of falls right in line with what we the direction we've been going this past hour here. Uh, Mental is tied to emotional, right? And I guess I come back to the whole idea of which comes first, emotional stability or mental stability. It's kind of like the chicken or the egg. Which one comes first, or are they literally tied to each other and you're going to develop them at the same time? Or give us your take on mental versus emotional strength.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it kind of goes hand in hand. So I don't know if anybody caught on to how I was trying to be purposeful in how I would describe it, but I didn't explicitly say this. Is if you took a Venn diagram, on one hand, you have all of your emotions and your internal experiences that you can experience. So fear, self-doubt, hesitation, trust, etc., or like not trust, but confidence and so forth. And on the other side, you have your actions. which is, how you play, what you're committed to, if you're a leader, the responsibilities that you have, like all the things that you have to, regardless of how you feel, you have to step into and you have to do. To me, the bridge between the two is the word and.
Yeah.
The word and is, hey, I can feel this and I can still choose to, again, do all the things that we were talking about earlier. So I think that's one way in which the mental and emotional can get kind of blended together. I think the other side of this, though, is it can go in both directions too, where um, one of my I'll give my wife here a lot of credit because so my wife was a track and field athlete. She's a runner. She's run a few marathons, and I'll never forget like during one of them, well, during both of them, I was her training partner. Now I did not run with her. I was on a bike.
Right.
Okay, I did not. I was not. I'm not a runner by any means. So my job was to hold the backpack with everything to make sure she could do it and so forth. And
Right.
I'll never forget, it was like a Saturday morning and she was supposed to go out on a run. Like it was going to be one of her longest runs before doing the actual marathon. And it was around 20 miles or so. And I asked her, I was like, all right, like, are you ready? And she was like, I don't feel ready, but that doesn't mean that I can't do it. And I thought that was like such a great example of like, again, you can feel one way and still choose to step into a different space. And to me, that's where, again, it's not discrediting the emotional experience. You
Yeah.
can feel those things, but at the end of the day, like you have a choice in how you choose, like what you choose to do next. And that's why I'm like a big proponent of I like to differentiate two things, like the reaction versus a response. Response is usually more deliberate, more purposeful. Reaction is more that gut, like immediate reaction that you have to something. More often than not, that gut reaction, whether it's a physical thing or a mental thing, isn't always the most helpful thing to us.
Yeah.
But what I care most about is what you choose to do next. So, along those lines, the other thing I'll say oftentimes is that I care more about your second thought than your first thought.
Okay.
What I mean by that is you make a mistake, something doesn't go your way, your immediate reaction might be very self-critical, might be beating yourself up, might be
Yeah.
negative, etc. But what I cared about most is what you replace it with, because do you either get stuck in that spiral and then you keep feeding into it,
Yeah.
or do you say, okay, hey, that was my reaction. Now here's what I'm going to choose to think next, and do so in a way that's more helpful, do so in a way that's more productive to me. So that for me is at least kind of where my mind kind of goes, is how where they work together, and then also what you do physically can then also shape what you feel as well.
Right. Well, everyone, we've been listening to Zach Brandon on the Sport Fuels Life podcast. Zach, before I let you get away, for all the coaches that are listening in, is there, doesn't matter what sport they're coming from or where they come from, their background, is there one little thing that they could do to help their athletes be a little bit more mentally strong? Just a small little nugget?
Ooh, small little nugget outside of what we just have shared. What have we
Yeah.
not shared? I
I
think
mean, like an easy one that's just like, okay, here's just one little thing that, might get them out of a bad mental space into a little more of a. I'll say this: I've always been, and I don't know that I'm right with this or wrong. It seems to have worked for me whenever my players are in a tough situation. I try to get them to smile or laugh, and
mm,
for me it feels like it breaks them out of this real tense period. Um, and that's kind of my go-to because I do it myself as well. Right? Is there something like that that a coach could use?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's see. The first thing that comes to mind, I'll play around with this here. Just from this goes back to the target idea, because again, we focus matters just so much, and what we maybe don't always realize is the role that our eyes play in that process. So, if you can, Bill, I'm gonna test you here briefly here.
Okay.
I don't know if you're a math expert, but
No.
I'm gonna give you I'm gonna give you a math equation for a moment.
Okay.
Um, can you tell me what is 18 times 9?
Uh, 168. No.
I that honestly, I couldn't even tell you. I just threw out a number
Okay.
here for.
Okay.
I think the name. I think it's 18 times 9. I want to say it's like 162. I think is what it
I was
takes.
close.
Don't, whoever's listening,
Okay.
don't fact check this. All
Right.
right,
Okay.
but the point being, and if people see the video, this will make more sense. If you watched your eyes during that,
Mhm.
your eyes went up.
Okay.
So what I mean by that is when we're thinking, our eyes start to like look around, and it's a lot more of a broad, generalized focus.
Okay.
But when we're really locked in, it's like we're like we see a target. We're focused on one thing at a time. So I bring this up because like when things start to speed up on somebody or the game, like they feel like they're overthinking a lot, overwhelming, like be really intentional to funnel their focus down into like one thing and like be really intentional about where they direct their eyes.
Okay.
That for me is like again going hand in hand with like the man who aims at nothing hits it with amazing accuracy. Like we need a target, and so don't forget how valuable that can be for your eyes. So for example, in pitching, like the old adage all the time is like, let's say you're on the mound and you're missing repeatedly to a certain side of the plate and you keep making kind of the same mistake. You kind of have a couple options. You can either think to change your mechanics and try to adjust how your body is moving to get that ball to whatever spot you're trying to hit,
Right.
or you repeat the same thing you're doing and just change your sights, just change your target. And so I say that from a standpoint of like, I think sometimes like that's overly simple. Doesn't mean it's easy, but I think it's like it's sometimes it's such an overlooked um strategy or like not even strategy but just core part of sport that we like immediately default to like, well, how do I change your thoughts or how do I help you with your confidence or with like a reset trigger. There's a time and place for all that, but like don't also like overlook something that's like so straightforward that gets in the way sometimes of us being successful.
Well, Zach, man, I appreciate your time. Once again, everyone, Zach Brandon, we're going to call him a mental performance guru because I've just had an hour-long class, and hopefully you've taken away some of these nuggets as well. Zach, appreciate your time, man. Keep doing what you're doing, helping coaches and athletes out there. Best of luck to you, and I really appreciate you being with Sports Fields Life podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Bill.
Alrighty, gang. Remember, once again, Zach Brandon, sports performance guru. You've been watching Sport Fields Life podcast. I'm Bill Riddle, your host, and we'll see you somewhere soon. Thank you, everyone.